All right, let's get right into it. This is a truly incredible story, It's about how one single, ordinary man came this close, I mean minutes away, from completely changing the course of history.
So it all boils down to this one number, 13. Yeah, just 13 minutes. I mean, think about that. That's the razor-thin margin, the tiny gap that separates the history we all know from a world that could have been, well, completely different. So what's the deal with these 13 minutes? Let's find out.
Okay, so picture this. The scene is just chaos. Hitler has just finished his yearly speech, the one he always gives to commemorate the beer hall putsch back in 23. It's 9:20 p.m., and then, boom, a massive bomb goes off. It completely shatters a stone pillar, and the whole ceiling just collapses, right onto the exact spot where Hitler and the rest of the Nazi leadership had been standing just moments before. The plan? It was perfect. The timing? Impeccable. But the target? Well, he was already gone. Right away, the regime is scrambling. They're thinking this has to be a huge conspiracy. Their first guess? The British Secret Service. It had to be some big, elaborate foreign plot. But the real story? Wow, it was so much more stunning. And honestly, for the Nazis, it was probably a lot more frightening.
So who was the mastermind behind this incredibly bold plan? Was it a spy, a disillusioned general? Nope, none of the above. The guy who pulled this off was Johann Georg Elser, a 36-year-old carpenter and cabinet maker from a tiny little town in southern Germany. Just a regular guy.
And that's what's so wild about this. Elser wasn't part of some secret club or organized resistance. He did this all by himself. It was just him, driven by his own conscience. See, he was watching what was happening to ordinary workers, their rights just disappearing. And by 1938, he was absolutely sure that Hitler was going to drag all of Europe into a catastrophic war. His own words were that he wanted his act to prevent even greater bloodshed. It was as simple and as profound as that.
So that's the big question, right? How in the world does one carpenter, all alone, pull off something so complex? I mean, the dedication, the sheer guts it must have taken, it's just mind-boggling. And the method he came up with, well, it was nothing short of genius.
Okay, get this. For over a month, night after night, he's working in the pitch black, in total silence. And the whole time he's under the constant threat of being discovered. Can you even imagine the nerves of steel that would take? It's just incredible. Every single sound had to be smothered. Every speck of dust had to be cleaned up before the beer hall opened for business the next day. And his genius wasn't just about being sneaky. The guy was a brilliant mechanic, too. He actually built this super elaborate timer with 2 clocks, one as a backup, that could run for 144 hours straight. And to make sure no one heard that telltale ticking, he put the whole thing in a cork-lined box. I mean, come on, the guy literally thought of everything.
All right, so let's jump to the night itself, November 8th. This is where we see how this incredible, meticulous plan, a plan years in the making, gets completely derailed, and not by a spy or a soldier, but by a little bit of bad luck and a simple weather report.
This is where it gets just tragically perfect. See, Hitler's speeches in this hall usually went on for hours, but not this night. Why? Fog. A dense fog canceled his flight back to Berlin. He was anxious to get back to his military planners, so he decides to take a train instead. And that meant he had to start his speech early and, more importantly, end it early. He walked out of that hall at 9:07 p.m. Elser's bomb? It detonated at exactly 9:20 p.m., right on schedule. But Hitler was already gone. 13 minutes. That's all it was. And make no mistake, the bomb worked. The blast was huge. The ceiling came down. The podium, the front tables, they were just splinters. It proved that Elser's bomb was more than powerful enough to do the job. If it weren't for those 13 minutes, just think about it. The entire course of World War II, the Holocaust, it all might have been completely different. And historians pretty much agree on this. If Hitler had died in 1939, it would have changed, well, everything. So what happened to Elser? Well, he was caught trying to cross the border into Switzerland. And after that, his story gets complicated. It was deliberately twisted and then basically buried for decades. He became this really convenient but also really uncomfortable truth that a lot of people just didn't want to deal with. You see, for the Gestapo, the whole thing was unbelievable. The idea that a single, ordinary German guy, a working-class carpenter, no less, could act with that much determination, it just didn't compute. It was incomprehensible to them. They tortured him for days, trying to get him to name his co-conspirators, but he stuck to his story. He acted alone. And for them, and honestly for a lot of other people for a long, long time, it just seemed impossible.
And for years, years, his story was just forgotten. It was totally overshadowed by other resistance plots, like the big one in 1944, led by the army officers. It's also hard to remember, but in post-war Germany, a lot of people who resisted were actually seen as traitors. Elser's own family was ostracized in their hometown. It took decades, literally decades, for Germany to come around and see him not as a traitor, but as a hero, as a man who tried to stop an absolute catastrophe before it got even worse.
So they kept him alive for years. He was a special prisoner of the regime. But in April 1945, with the Allied forces closing in, the order came down from the very top: execute him. He was murdered in Dachau concentration camp just weeks before the war was over. He never got to see a world free from the tyranny he fought so hard against. And he never got to see his own name cleared.
So what do we take away from all this? Elser's incredible story is this powerful reminder that courage can come from the most unexpected places. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? What is the real power of one person's conscience when it's up against an entire regime? His story shows us that history can pivot on the absolute smallest of details: a change in travel plans, a little bit of fog, and 13 fateful minutes.